On a quiet Friday evening in a modest suburban home in Austin, Texas, the air was thick with the kind of silence that often accompanies a family that has drifted apart. Alicia Andrade, a single mother, sat at the dining table with her two children, Elena and Jonathan. The table was set with a simple dinner of pasta, a meal that had become routine in their household. Elena, at 16, was smart and fiercely independent, yet she often wore a veil of distance that made her seem older than her years. She sat hunched over her phone, scrolling endlessly, her focus locked on the screen as if it held the answers to all her questions. Jonathan, 12 and full of curiosity, poked at his food, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quite articulate. He was growing up fast, asking questions that sometimes left Alicia scrambling for answers. That evening felt ordinary, just another night of eating, watching TV, and heading to bed. But beneath the surface, it was the calm before a storm that Alicia couldn't see brewing. She was exhausted, drained by the demands of work, the pile of bills that seemed to grow taller each month, and the palpable silence that filled the room. They weren't talking, they were merely existing in the same space, and that hurt more than she was willing to admit. "Mom, this pasta is so boring," Jonathan complained, breaking the silence. His voice was tinged with the frustration of a boy who craved excitement, not just in his meals but in life itself. Elena rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath that Alicia couldn't quite catch. Within moments, the two siblings were bickering, the familiar rhythm of their arguments filling the air. Alicia sighed, scrolling through her phone aimlessly, trying to drown out the noise. "Can we just eat in peace for once?" she said, her voice a mix of fatigue and irritation. Jonathan shot her a look, his expression a blend of confusion and disappointment. "I'm just saying it could be better, you know? We always have pasta." Elena chimed in, "Yeah, maybe we could have tacos or something? I mean, it's Friday." Alicia looked at them, her heart heavy. "I'll try to mix it up next week, okay? Just eat what's on your plate for now." The conversation fizzled out as they returned to their respective distractions. Jonathan resumed his poking and prodding at the pasta, while Elena's fingers danced across her phone screen. The silence returned, thicker than before, and Alicia felt the weight of it pressing down on her. As she glanced around the table, she realized how disconnected they had become. The laughter that once filled their home had been replaced by this uncomfortable quiet. She missed the days when they would share stories over dinner, when they would laugh until their sides hurt. Now, it felt like they were just going through the motions. "Do you guys remember when we used to have family game nights?" Alicia asked suddenly, hoping to spark some kind of connection. Jonathan looked up, his interest piqued. "Yeah. Those were fun. Can we do that again?" Elena shrugged, her gaze still glued to her phone. "I don't know, Mom. I'm kind of busy." Alicia felt a pang of disappointment. "It doesn't have to be a big deal. Just a few games and some snacks. It could be fun." "Fine," Elena replied, finally looking up. "But only if we can order pizza." "Deal," Alicia said, a small smile breaking through her weariness. As they finished dinner, Alicia felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could find their way back to each other, piece by piece. But deep down, she knew that the real challenge lay ahead. Secrets had a way of creeping in, and trust was fragile. That night, as she tucked Jonathan into bed, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mom, do you ever feel like something's going to change? Like something big is coming?" Alicia paused, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Just, sometimes it feels like things are too quiet. Like a storm is coming." She brushed his hair back, forcing a smile. "It's just a quiet night, buddy. Nothing to worry about." But as she closed the door to his room, Alicia couldn't shake the feeling that Jonathan was right. Change was on the horizon, and it would soon turn their world upside down. The dinner table felt more like a battleground than a family gathering. Alicia sat across from her children, Jonathan and Elena, who were physically present but emotionally miles apart. The clattering of forks and the muted sounds of the television in the background only amplified the silence that hung heavily in the air. Later that evening, the tension escalated. Jonathan and Elena were sprawled on the couch, bickering over who had the best spot to watch their favorite show. It was absurd, two siblings squabbling over a couch, but their voices grew louder, fueled by frustration. "Just let me sit there," Jonathan shouted, shoving Elena lightly. "Stop it. You're such a brat," she retorted, pushing back. Alicia felt her patience fray. "Enough. You both need to grow up," she snapped, her voice rising above theirs. Elena stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her, while Jonathan sulked on the couch, arms crossed and eyes glued to the flickering screen. Underneath the surface of their arguments, Alicia sensed something deeper, a restlessness in both her children and within herself. After finally coaxing Jonathan off the couch and into his room, she tucked him in as she had done countless times before. It was a ritual that had once brought her comfort, but tonight, it felt hollow. "I'm sorry, Mom," Jonathan mumbled, his eyes heavy with sleep. "It's okay, buddy," she replied, forcing a smile. But inside, Alicia felt drained. The weight of her recent divorce had left her emotionally and financially exhausted. As she closed the door to his room, the loneliness of her life crashed over her like a wave. She longed for someone to see her, to love her, to remind her that she was more than just a tired mother struggling to keep everything together. But all she had was the oppressive silence of the night, and the cracks in their family felt wider than ever. Once the kids were in bed, the house fell eerily quiet. Alicia sat alone at the kitchen table, a half-empty glass of wine in front of her, staring at the bills spread out like a daunting puzzle. Electricity, water, credit card, each one demanding more than she could give. The refrigerator hummed softly, and the clock on the wall ticked away, each sound magnified in the stillness. Her thoughts spiraled in circles, a cacophony of worries and fears. "This is just another night," she told herself, trying to find solace in the familiar routine. "Just another evening like the countless others I've survived." But the truth was, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the emptiness she carried inside, the feeling of being invisible and unloved. She was a woman who had once dreamed of a future filled with joy, laughter, and partnership, but now found herself lost in the shadows of her own life. As the night wore on, Alicia couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The silence was deafening, and the cracks in her family were threatening to widen into a chasm. She had no idea how close they were to a complete break, but the weight of it loomed over her like a storm cloud, ready to burst. Alicia sat alone at the kitchen table, drowning in responsibility and silence. The weight of her life pressed down on her, and she found herself drifting back to the years when she was married, when she still believed in forever. Her ex-husband, Carlos, wasn't a terrible man. At least, he hadn't been at first. He was charming, hard-working, and for a while, he made her feel like she mattered. But as time passed, love faded, distance grew, and then came the betrayal. She had never told the kids the whole story. She couldn't. Carlos had been unfaithful more than once. When she finally found the courage to leave, she promised herself she would never let anyone break her like that again. Yet promises were easier to make than to keep, and wounds, no matter how old, had a way of reopening when least expected. Just as she was about to clean up the kitchen, her phone vibrated on the table. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in months. David. David was complicated. He wasn't her husband. He wasn't her friend. He had been there for her during her divorce, someone who understood the loneliness, who filled the silence when it became too heavy to bear. Though she had told herself she was done with him for good, her heart raced that evening at the sight of his name. She hesitated, staring at the glowing screen, torn between ignoring the call and answering it. But curiosity, or perhaps weakness, got the better of her. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "Alicia," he said, his voice low and familiar. Too familiar. "I just couldn't stop thinking about you," he continued. She should have hung up, but she didn't. They talked for hours about nothing and everything. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, desired, alive. When she finally hung up, guilt pressed down on her like a heavy weight. What was she doing? What was she risking? But deep down, she already knew the answer. She was on the brink of something dangerous. The days that followed blurred together, but during the day, she was just a mother, cooking, working, scolding her kids for fighting over the remote. But at night, after the lights went out, she became someone else. In the quiet of her home, she found herself lost in thoughts of David. The conversations replayed in her mind, each word igniting a spark of something she thought she had buried. She remembered the way he listened, the way he made her laugh, the way he filled the void that had grown in her heart. One evening, as she washed the dishes, she caught her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her looked tired, worn down by the weight of her responsibilities. But there was a flicker of hope in her eyes, a longing for connection that she couldn't ignore. That night, after tucking the kids into bed, she found herself scrolling through her phone, hesitating before sending a message to David. It felt reckless, but the thrill of it sent a shiver down her spine. "Hey, I've been thinking about you," she typed, her heart racing. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Almost immediately, her phone buzzed with a reply. "I've been thinking about you too. Can we talk?" Alicia's breath caught in her throat. The anticipation was intoxicating. They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in town, a cozy place where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sound of soft jazz. When she arrived, she spotted David sitting at a corner table, his dark hair tousled and a warm smile on his face. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment, the world around them faded away. "Hey," he said, his voice low and inviting. "Hey," she replied, feeling a rush of warmth as she sat down. They talked easily, laughter spilling between them like sunlight. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and Alicia felt the weight of her worries lift, if only for a moment. They shared stories, dreams, and fears, each revelation drawing them closer together. As the evening wore on, Alicia found herself leaning in, captivated by the intensity of his gaze. There was a magnetic pull between them, an unspoken understanding that transcended their complicated pasts. But as the night deepened, reality crept back in. Alicia's heart raced with excitement, but the shadows of her responsibilities loomed large. She was a mother, a woman who had fought hard to reclaim her life, and yet here she was, teetering on the edge of something that could unravel everything she had worked for. When they finally stood to leave, David reached for her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. "I'm glad we talked," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "Me too," she whispered, feeling a mix of exhilaration and fear. As they walked out into the cool night air, Alicia knew she was standing at a crossroads. The choices she made in the coming days would shape her future, and she had to decide if she was ready to embrace the unknown or retreat back into the safety of her familiar, yet lonely, life. Alicia led a double life, concealing conversations and deleting messages as if her phone held a treasure trove of forbidden truths. She guarded it closely, aware that the walls of her secret world were thin and could crumble at any moment. It was Jonathan who first noticed. One evening, he looked up from his homework, curiosity etched on his face. "Mom, why are you always on your phone?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Alicia laughed it off, brushing aside his question with a wave of her hand. "Just work stuff, sweetie. Nothing to worry about." But Helena, her teenage daughter, wasn't so easily fooled. She shot Alicia a knowing look, one that said, "I know more than you think." The weight of that gaze made Alicia's stomach churn. She felt exposed, as if her secrets were painted on her skin for all to see. It wasn't just phone calls. David had been persistent, pleading with her to meet. After days of back and forth, she finally relented, telling her kids she had extra work. She left them pizza money and promised to be home late. When she saw him that night, the moment their eyes locked, all the boundaries she had tried to erect came crashing down. It was as if oxygen had rushed back into her lungs after years of suffocation. The thrill was dangerous, reckless, and undeniably wrong. Yet, she couldn't push it away. As she drove home that evening, the weight of what she had done pressed heavily on her chest. The house was dark when she arrived, her children asleep. The silence was no longer comforting, it felt accusatory. In that stillness, a chilling realization settled over her. She was no better than Carlos, her ex-husband. The betrayal she had once condemned now lived in her own heart. In the weeks that followed, Alicia's life became a precarious balancing act. By day, she was a devoted mother, making breakfast, dropping the kids off at school, paying bills, and keeping the house in order. By night, she transformed into someone else, someone who made secret phone calls, deleted texts, and concocted excuses for why she was coming home later than usual. She told herself she was in control, that no one suspected a thing. But deep down, she knew better. Jonathan grew more clingy, trailing her through the house with endless questions. "Where are you going, Mom? Why are you smiling at your phone? Who makes you laugh?" Helena, on the other hand, withdrew further into herself. She spent hours in her room, headphones on, her eyes narrowing whenever they met. She didn't say much, but her silence spoke volumes. Alicia felt the tension mounting, the walls of her double life closing in around her. Each day was a reminder of the precariousness of her situation, and she found herself caught between the thrill of her secret and the love for her children. The fear of being discovered loomed large, but so did the intoxicating pull of what she had with David. One evening, after a particularly long day, Alicia found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. The screen lit up with a message from David, and her heart raced. She knew she was walking a tightrope, but the allure of his words was too strong to resist. "Can we talk tonight?" it read. With a deep breath, she replied, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed. "Yes. I'll make it work." As she hit send, a mix of exhilaration and dread washed over her. The choices she was making felt like a gamble, and she was acutely aware that the stakes were higher than ever. The atmosphere in Alicia's home had shifted dramatically. The choices she made sent ripples through her family, ripples that were quickly turning into waves. On a Friday evening, she promised her children, Jonathan and Helena, that they would have dinner together, no phones, no distractions, just the three of them, like old times. But then David called. He wanted to meet up for just an hour, just to talk. Alicia told herself it would be fine, that she would be back in no time, that her children would be okay. After all, she deserved this little bit of happiness. But 1 hour turned into 3. By the time she returned home, the kitchen table was empty. Cold plates of food sat untouched, waiting for her in the living room, where Helena stood with her arms crossed, her eyes blazing with anger. "You forgot," she said flatly, her voice sharper than any scream. Jonathan appeared from the hallway, his face pale, his voice trembling. "Were you with someone, Mom?" Alicia's stomach dropped. She opened her mouth, searching for words, for excuses, for anything to say. But nothing came out. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the walls of her secret world crumbling piece by piece. The next morning, Helena didn't hold back. "I know you're seeing someone," she said coldly. "You think we don't notice, but we're not stupid." Alicia tried to deny it, to explain, but the truth was written all over her face. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears, while Helena's were full of fury. "You're just like Dad," she spat, and those words hit Alicia like a dagger. Because she knew it was true. It was that very betrayal that had once torn their family apart. Days passed, but the damage was done. Helena stopped speaking to her altogether. She spent more time with her friends than under Alicia's roof. Jonathan grew silent. His questions were replaced by a heavy quiet. He wouldn't look her in the eye, wouldn't laugh at her jokes, wouldn't let her tuck him in as she always had. The house that had once felt lonely now felt hostile. Every corner whispered of guilt, every silence screamed of shame. And yet, she still couldn't bring herself to end things with David. Because in those moments with him, she felt alive, desired, seen. But at what cost? As the days turned into weeks, Alicia found herself trapped in a cycle of guilt and longing. She would sit in her car, parked outside the school, replaying the last conversation with David in her mind. The way he had looked at her, the way he made her feel, like she was more than just a mother, more than just a housekeeper. One afternoon, after dropping the kids off, she received a text from David, "Can we meet tonight? I need to see you." Her heart raced. She knew she shouldn't, but the pull was too strong. "Okay," she replied, her fingers trembling. As she prepared to leave, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, lost, conflicted, and torn between two worlds. When she arrived at David's apartment, the familiar warmth enveloped her. They talked, laughed, and for a moment, everything felt right. But as the evening wore on, the weight of her choices pressed heavily on her chest. "I can't keep doing this," she finally said, her voice breaking. David reached for her, his eyes filled with concern. "You deserve to be happy, Alicia. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Tears filled her eyes as she realized the truth. She had been living for herself, but at what cost? As she drove home that night, the silence felt deafening. She knew she had to make a choice, but the thought of losing David was unbearable. When she pulled into the driveway, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation that awaited her inside. "Mom?" Jonathan's voice broke the silence as she stepped through the door. Alicia's heart sank. She had hoped to slip in unnoticed, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Hey, I'm home," she said, forcing a smile. Helena stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You're late," she said, her tone icy. "I know, I'm sorry." "I got caught up at work," Alicia replied, her voice shaky. "Right," Helena scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Just like you got caught up last time." Alicia felt a pang of guilt wash over her. "Can we talk about this?" "Talk?" Helena echoed, her voice rising. "What's there to talk about? You're just going to lie again." "Please, just give me a chance to explain," Alicia pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. But Helena shook her head, stepping back. "I don't want to hear it." Jonathan looked between them, confusion etched on his face. What's going on? Nothing, just go to bed, Helena snapped. Alicia felt her heart break as she watched her children retreat to their rooms, the door slamming shut behind them. She sank onto the couch, the weight of her choices crashing down on her. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. Every corner echoed with disappointment, every silence a reminder of her failures. And yet, even in the midst of the chaos, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still drawn to David. Days turned into weeks, and the rift between Alicia and her children only widened. Helena refused to speak to her, while Jonathan's silence weighed heavily on her heart. The guilt gnawed at her, but the thrill of her secret life with David kept her tethered to him. One evening, as she sat alone in the living room, her phone buzzed with a message from David. "Can we talk? I miss you." Alicia's heart raced. She knew she shouldn't, but the pull was too strong. "Okay," she replied, her fingers trembling. Alicia felt a pang of guilt wash over her. As she typed the message, she glanced around the dimly lit room, the shadows of her children's absence looming large. The thrill of her secret life with David felt like a fleeting escape, but the reality of her family's pain was an ever-present weight. Suddenly, she heard footsteps approaching. Helena stood in the doorway again, her expression a mix of anger and hurt. "You're really going to choose him over us?" she asked, her voice breaking. Alicia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth hung heavily in the air, suffocating her. I don't know what to say," she finally admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. Helena's gaze softened for a moment, but then hardened again. "You need to figure it out, Mom. Because this isn't just about you anymore." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Alicia alone with her turmoil. The silence that followed felt deafening, and Alicia realized that the choice she had made was not just about her happiness, it was about the family she was slowly losing. Subscribe to the channel,